Umar could not sleep any longer. He got out of bed, opened the door of his house, and went outside. The full moon shone above the rooftops, and the streets were empty and still. After a while, Umar noticed a man walking briskly towards the Kaaba. His steps were measured, and he walked as if he was climbing a gentle slope. He was neither tall nor short, yet he seemed to tower over all his surroundings. Umar immediately recognized him as being the man he hated most, the man who had brought so much trouble to the people of Mecca by calling them to a new religion, the man who challenged all the gods they had been worshipping for ages as false and powerless, and instead invited them to serve the one God alone. The man who had divided the Quraysh, father against son, brother against brother, husband against wife. As Umar watched Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, for that is who it was walking towards the Kaaba, he was reminded of the very scene which had kept him restless all night, causing him to wander out into the street while everyone else was sleeping. Abdullah's lovely face flashed before his eyes. "Yes, Umar, you have made life unbearable for us," she had told him. His own cousin, Abdullah, a member of one of the most respected families of Mecca, had defied him and was leaving for Abyssinia with many other young men and women who were following Muhammad. Umar had never imagined that Abdullah would be amongst those who would be forced to leave Mecca. True, he had been responsible for making life miserable for Muhammad's companions. As a result, one by one they had deserted their families, and each broken family filled Umar with greater wrath against Muhammad. Yet he never thought that they would ever leave their ancestral homes. That morning he had gone to Abdullah's house to see what her plans were, and had found her in the midst of making preparations for a long journey. Umar had said, "What? You two are leaving?" And she had replied with those words so full of hurt and reproach, "Yes, Umar, you have made life unbearable for us. Our only crime has been to believe in the one God. We have complete trust in Him. We know that He will guide and protect us so that we may be allowed to serve Him and worship Him in peace." On any other occasion, Umar would have hit her. The very thought was unbearable for him, members of his own tribe embracing Islam and following Muhammad, the renegade. But at the same time, the sight of these noble sons and daughters of the Quraysh leaving Mecca for no other crime than that of professing a new faith filled him with grief. He had not been able to answer her. His heart ached, and his eyes filled with tears. His mouth opened to utter a curse, but to his astonishment, he found himself saying, "God be with you, then." Abdullah was taken aback. She had never known Umar to be soft-hearted. On the contrary, he was one of the fiercest, toughest men in Mecca. A ray of hope entered her heart. Could it be that even the indomitable Umar would bend before the power of truth? In the evening, when her husband returned home, she told him about Umar's visit. She voiced her hope that Umar would someday at least be sympathetic to their cause, if not to embrace it. "So, because he did not curse you, you think he might someday join us?" her husband Amir asked. "Well, yes, I have some hope," she replied. But Amir shook his head. Old Khattab's ass might embrace Islam, maybe, but Khattab's son? Ha, never. Umar's conversation with Abdullah had left a strong impression on him. His conscience was disturbed, and he was ill at ease. Why should people who had lived all their lives in Mecca be forced to leave only because their beliefs were different? Umar could not fully justify to himself the persecution which he in part had been responsible for. He hated himself for it, but because his pride would not allow him to admit it, he was condemned to sleepless nights. It was on one of those nights that he saw the blessed Prophet Muhammad on his way to the Kaaba. The very sight of the man enraged him. Was he not the root of all the trouble, the reason why families were split apart and young people were misled? And there he was, free to walk the streets and to worship in the sacred house. Umar was furious. He muttered, "Umar, you are the most feared man in Mecca. You hate Islam and all that it stands for, and more than anything, you hate that wretched man there that strolls by your door as if he had none to fear. Therefore, you should keep an eye on him." And so saying, Umar followed the lonely silhouette down the streets to the Kaaba. As he entered the Haram, the blessed Prophet Muhammad was already there, facing north towards Jerusalem, performing his prayers and glorifying God. Umar had never actually heard what Muhammad said he had received from God because of prejudice and indifference. He did not want to hear. But Abdullah's face appeared again before him as he stood in the darkness of the Haram, and his curiosity became aroused. What spell or magic could there be in those words to cause people to give up their livelihood and their customs to follow him? By God, Umar feared no man, no magic of any kind, for he was the strongest man in Makkah. Lifting his arm, he pushed aside the heavy cloth that draped the Kaaba and hid behind it. Then he slowly inched forward, nearer to the blessed Prophet Muhammad. "Talk, Muhammad," he muttered between clenched teeth. "Let us hear the magic words. Spin your witchcraft for Umar." As if in answer, the blessed Prophet Muhammad's voice rang out clearly.
الحاقة ما الحاقة وما أدراك ما الحاقة.
The sure reality. What is the sure reality? And what will make thee realize what the sure reality is? Umar leaned forward so as not to miss a word.
وجاء فرعون ومن قبله والمؤتفكات بالخاطئة فعصوا رسول ربهم فأخذهم أخذة رابية.
And Pharaoh and those before him and the cities overthrown committed habitual sin and disobeyed each the messenger of their Lord, so he seized them with an increasing penalty.
يومئذ تعرضون لا تخفى منكم خافية.
That day shall ye be brought to judgment, not an act of yours that ye hide will be hidden.
فأما من أوتي كتابه بيمينه فيقول هاؤم اقرءوا كتابيه.
Then he that will be given his record in his right hand will say, "Ah, here, read ye my record."
وأما من أوتي كتابه بشماله فيقول يا ليتني لم أوت كتابيه.
And he that will be given his record in his left hand will say, "Ah, would that my record had not been given to me."
ما أغنى عني ماليه هلك عني سلطانيه.
Of no profit to me has been my wealth, my power has gone from me.
إنه كان لا يؤمن بالله العظيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فليس له اليوم هاهنا حميم ولا طعام إلا من غسلين.
This was he that would not believe in God Most High, and would not urge the feeding of the needy. So no friend hath he here this day, nor hath he any food except the foul pus from the wounds. The fearful and penetrating words of the Qur'an struck Umar to the heart. He caught his breath as if stunned, and was forced to consider its meaning. Truly, it has power, for I can recognize power, but it is in the form of poetry. Powerful poetry, that is it. It is this poetry which has corrupted the people of the Quraysh. But the blessed Prophet Muhammad's words broke through Umar's thoughts.
إنه لقول رسول كريم وما هو بقول شاعر قليلا ما تؤمنون.
This is verily the word of an honored messenger. It is not the word of a poet. Little it is ye believe. Umar was completely taken aback. Was this man able to read his thoughts? If he could read people's thoughts, then he must be a kahin, a soothsayer, able to read the secrets that lay in people's hearts. Again, the blessed Prophet Muhammad's words held his attention.
ولا بقول كاهن قليلا ما تذكرون تنزيل من رب العالمين.
Nor is it the word of a soothsayer. Little it is ye remember. This is a message sent down from the Lord of the worlds.
ولو تقول علينا بعض الأقاويل لأخذنا منه باليمين ثم لقطعنا منه الوتين.
And if the messenger were to invent any sayings in our name, we should certainly seize him by his right hand, and we should certainly then cut off the artery of his heart. Never before had Umar been confronted with such a situation. The argument was overpowering. If Muhammad were lying, if he had not received a message from God, then surely his God would destroy him. Umar could take no more. Confused and perplexed, he stepped out from behind the curtain, turned his back on the Kaaba, and walked slowly along the deserted road to his house. Above the rooftops of Makkah, a pink veil covered the sky, as if in the receding darkness a dawn of hope was rising over the city. So it was in Umar's turbulent heart. For a moment it seemed as if the darkness had lifted, allowing a glimmer of understanding and faith to enter, but in fact the real battle within Umar had just begun. He felt this glimmer of understanding to be a weakness, and this only increased his stubbornness and anger. A part of him would have liked to wipe out all that he had heard that night, as well as the face and words of Abdullah, so that he could remain undisturbed. But this was not to be. Another part of him, deep within, recognized the blessed Prophet Muhammad as being sincere, a man of integrity, whose message was closer to the truth than anything Umar had ever learned from his forefathers. Then all the superstitions which had held his heart and mind in chains since his youth. Even so, he could not bring himself to give up the old beliefs for the sake of one man's claim, for the sake of a mere woman's words. It was in this state of mind that Umar, under the pink light of dawn, entered his house and closed the door. The newly converted Muslims were a tortured and persecuted minority in Mecca. They could neither profess their faith openly nor could they pray in the haram, and Umar's fierce opposition played a large part in creating this situation. They were few, and their opponents and persecutors were many, but none of them was as active and zealous as Umar. The blessed Prophet's headquarters were located by the side of Mount Safa, in the house of his close companion Arqam. His followers would come and stay with him for several days and nights at a time, learning the Qur'an by heart, talking with him about Islam, and discussing amongst themselves how best to survive in a community which had rejected them, and how best to prepare themselves for the great struggle which they knew lay ahead. The blessed Prophet had divided his Muslim community into groups, and each group was entrusted to the care and guidance of one of the blessed Prophet's senior followers. Besides coming to the house of Arqam, they would also visit each other's houses, reciting and remembering and understanding the latest revelations learned from the blessed Prophet, and recording on leaves and bits of parchments the verses which were later to become the surahs of the Qur'an. Unbeknown to Umar, his own sister Fatimah and her husband Saeed housed one of these centers, for they too had become Muslims. One morning, in the blessed Prophet's house, the conversation had been particularly discouraging. News had reached them that Abu Jahl, another fierce enemy of Islam, and Umar had planned for several of the followers to be beaten and insulted. It seemed to the group seated in the blessed Prophet's house that they had no other recourse but to hide or flee. "The trouble is, there aren't enough of us to resist," said one. "Look at us. Some of us former slaves, most of us too young. What can we do against the mighty Quraysh? What we need is a few strong people of our own." The others smiled sadly in agreement, and they all sat thinking over what had just been said. Slowly, the blessed Prophet, who was sitting close by, raised his hands to God and prayed, "O Allah, lend strength to Islam. Guide to Islam Abu Jahl, son of Hisham, or Umar, son of Khattab. O Allah, whichever of these men you love more, guide him to Islam." Everyone there who had heard the prayer repeated it silently in his own heart, and when the blessed Prophet sat down again, they murmured as if in one voice a quiet Ameen. Umar, meanwhile, was more miserable than ever. By night the scene in the haram continued to haunt him. The verses from the Qur'an which the blessed Prophet had recited haunted his dreams and kept him from sleep. "That day shall ye be brought to judgment, not an act of yours that ye hide shall be hidden." By day, Umar's fury against the blessed Prophet grew and grew. One particular morning, he reached a swift decision. "Why, what is the matter with me?" he declared aloud, as he paced back and forth in his room. "I see no problem at all. If there's a boil festering on your body, just slice it off. It's as simple as that." He reached for his sword. "If there is one scum destroying an entire city, then cut him down." He was astonished that he had not thought of it before. Umar, like all fierce men of action, believed that an idea could be crushed by force, and he could not wait once he had decided to use force. He had not yet understood that when a great truth, a great belief is born amongst people, and they are committed to it, it cannot be wiped out by force. Unaware of the forces that were surrounding him, Umar marched out of the house, sword in hand. To the passer-by in the street on that day in Mecca, this rough giant wielding a naked sword would not easily go unnoticed. It was not long before he came across his cousin Nu'aym, son of Abdullah al-Naham. Nu'aym's eyes fell upon the gleaming blade in Umar's fist. It did not speak well of his designs. Nu'aym tried to remain calm. "Where to, Umar?" he asked. Umar's face was white with determination. "Where to? Ha! Good question. To put an end to it? That's what. Put an end to that heretic who has divided the Quraysh and condemns the religion of our forefathers, who abuses our idols." Omar's voice rose to a high pitch, and people living along the street peered fearfully from their windows at the sound. "He shall condemn no more!" Omar's sword slashed the air. Nu'aym's heart sank. How would he ever stop this fanatic? Quickly he thought of something to say which would slow Umar's rush towards the blessed Prophet's house. "Whoever gave you the idea you could kill Muhammad and get away with it? Do you think that if you succeed, his family would leave you alive? Do you not realize what a blood retribution they would take on our tribe, the Banu Adi?" Umar shouted back his answer, and a terrible argument followed, each man out-yelling the other. "I see now," yelled Umar. "You too are a heretic. Come here, and I shall cure you of your illness." Summoning up his courage, Nu'aym answered, "You are so sure of yourself, Umar, you fool. You don't even know that your own sister is a Muslim? Yes, Fatimah and her husband Saeed. They're a lot wiser than you are. They don't stupidly cling to evil ways once they've heard the truth." "You lie!" gasped Umar, whose eyes bulged dangerously at this preposterous news. Abruptly he shifted direction from the blessed Prophet's house to that of his sisters. Nu'aym, seeing what he was about, tried to block the path, but Umar shoved him aside. "Then they shall be the first to die," he shouted, moving off with gigantic strides. But the road leading to Fatimah's house was a long one, and by the time Umar reached her door, some of his anger had spent itself. He stopped to catch his breath before pounding on the door with the butt of his sword, and in so doing, he caught the sound of voices chanting in unison. "ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم طه. He hesitated an instant, listening, then pounded on the door with all his strength. Within, Fatima, her husband Saeed, and Khabbab, the instructor, were reciting the most recent words of Allah they had been taught by the blessed Prophet. They halted, shocked at the intrusion. "Who is there?" called Fatima. "Umar, son of Khattab." At the sound of Umar's voice, Khabbab, a fragile man, disappeared into the inner room. "Quick," whispered Saeed, "hide the parchments." Fatima slid them inside her garment, close to her chest, and quickly composed herself. Umar knocked again, louder, and Saeed opened the door to reveal Umar's great form brandishing a sword. "What was all that muttering? Don't think I didn't hear you." Nothing, nothing, replied Fatima calmly. We were just talking. Liars, cowards! I know you are heretics! Fatima and Said looked at each other. Now that Umar knew, there was nothing to conceal. The truth is not what you believe it to be, said Said calmly. This was too much for Umar. Losing all control, he lunged forward and grabbed Said by the beard. Said, in trying to defend himself, fell backwards on the floor. Umar, seizing the advantage, leapt on his chest, pinned him down, and brandished his sword above his head. Fatima cried out, ran to her husband, and grabbing Umar's tunic, pulled it with all her strength to drag him from Said's chest. Umar, get off! Let him go! Umar, exasperated at the interruption, slapped her hard in the face. A trickle of blood ran down Fatima's cheek. Hurt and bleeding, she faced Umar bravely. "Oh, enemy of God," she said, "you hate us only because we believe in the one God." "That's right," said Umar. "Then do what you like with us, Umar," replied Fatima, her voice like steel. "We bear witness that there is no God but the one God, and that Muhammad is his prophet. Nothing you can do will change that, however much you hate it. We shall never abandon Islam." The determination and courage in his sister's voice so impressed Umar that it acted like a shower of cold water over his rage. Slowly the anger drained from his features. He relaxed his hold on Said and drew himself up to his full height. "All right, sister." Umar's voice was calmer now. "Then let me see what it is you are reading. If there is any sense in it, you could at least share it with me." Fatima hesitated and looked at her husband. "I promise not to throw it away. I'll return it to you," Umar assured her. "Very well," said Fatima. "But go and wash first. You are in no condition to touch the words of God." As Umar left the room, Khabbab, the instructor, emerged from the other room and scolded them in a loud whisper. "How can you trust an infidel and a man of such violence?" "I know my brother," answered Fatima, "and I have high hopes that Allah will direct him to the right path." Khabbab, seeing Umar returning, disappeared again into the back room. With a silent prayer, Fatima handed the pieces of parchment to her brother. Umar read,
سبح لله ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم له ملك السماوات والأرض يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم.
"Whatever is in the heavens and on earth, let it declare the praises and glory of God. For he is the exalted in might, the wise. To him belongs the kingdom of heavens and the earth. It is He who gives life and death, and He has power over all things. He is the first and the last, the evident and the imminent, and He has full knowledge of all things.
هو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما يعرج فيها وهو معكم أينما كنتم والله بما تعملون بصير.
He it is who created the heaven and the earth in 6 days, and moreover firmly sits on the throne of authority. He knows what enters within the earth and what comes forth out of it, what comes down from heavens and what mounts up to it. And He is with you wheresoever ye may be, and God sees well all that ye do.
له ملك السماوات والأرض وإلى الله ترجع الأمور. يولج الليل في النهار ويولج النهار في الليل وهو عليم بذات الصدور.
To Him belongs the kingdom of the heavens and the earth, and all affairs are referred back to God. He merges night into day, and He merges day into night, and He has full knowledge of the secrets of all hearts. Previously, Umar would not have understood the words on the parchment. They would have been as a foreign language to him, but now he immediately understood them, and they were clearly the truth. A conviction filled him as he read on, realizing for the first time that all along he had been mistaken, and that Muhammad was indeed the messenger from the one God. For indeed, how could there be other gods besides the one God? ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى. We have not sent down the Qur'an to thee to be an occasion for thy distress, but only as an admonition to those who fear God. تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى الرحمن على العرش استوى.
له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وما بينهما وما تحت الثرى.
A revelation from him who created the earth and the heavens on high. God, most gracious, firmly sits on the throne of authority. To him belongs what is in the heavens and on earth, and all between them, and all beneath the soil.
فلما أتاها نودي يا موسى إني أنا ربك فاخلع عليك إنك بالواد المقدس طوى وأنا اخترتك فاستمع لما يوحى.
But when he came to the fire, a voice was heard, O Moses, verily I am thy Lord, therefore in my presence put off thy shoes. Thou art in the sacred valley Tuwa. I have chosen thee, listen then to the inspiration sent to thee.
إنني أنا الله لا إله إلا أنا فاعبدني وأقم الصلاة لذكري.
Verily I am God, there is no God but I. So serve thou me only, and establish regular prayer for celebrating my praise.
إن الساعة آتية أكاد أخفيها لتجزى كل نفس بما تسعى.
Verily, the hour is coming. My design is to keep it hidden for every soul to receive its reward, but the measure of its endeavor.
فلا يصدنك عنها من لا يؤمن بها واتبع هواه فتردى.
Therefore let not such as believe not therein, but follow their own lusts, divert thee therefrom, lest thou perish. Enough! I need read no more, declared Umar with conviction. It is preposterous to associate anyone with the one God. How could I have ever believed otherwise? Quick! Where is Muhammad? Tell me. Sister and brother-in-law stood and looked at Umar, unsure of his true intentions. Khabbab came out of his hiding place and whispered to Saeed, Do you think that maybe the Prophet's prayer is going to be fulfilled? But Saeed said nothing. Then, glancing at Fatimah for approval, he finally told Umar where the blessed Prophet Muhammad could be found. Umar sheathed his sword, slung it over his shoulder, and started off for Dar Arqam, where the blessed Prophet was staying. Inside Dar Arqam, the blessed Prophet and his followers were seated reciting a surah, whilst Hamza and Talha were standing guard at the door. Umar knocked. "Who is there?" asked Talha. "Umar," came the response. The entire assembly looked up in amazement. What could he want, other than to persecute or to insult them? Dare they let him in? Hamza, seeing that the companions were doubtful, spoke up. "We should not fear him," he said. "If he has come with good intention, then he will embrace Islam. If not, why look around? There are enough of us to tackle one man, surely." Talha, at a sign from Hamza, unbarred the door and opened it. As soon as Umar stepped inside, Hamza and Talha seized his arms and took him to where the blessed Prophet was sitting. The blessed Prophet looked up. "Let him go," he told them, and moved calmly towards Umar. Umar made not a move. The blessed Prophet reached up to Umar's neck, took hold of his sword strap, and pulled the sword towards him. Umar, strong and ferocious, stood before his enemy, but was incapable of making a move. He began to tremble and shake from his head to his feet. The blessed Prophet looked into his eyes. "Umar," he said, "give up your wrong ways before God's curse falls upon you. Umar, accept Islam. Oh Allah, guide his heart to the right path." "What should I say?" stammered Umar. Hamza spoke up. "Say that you bear witness that there is but one God and that Muhammad is his messenger." Umar looked at Hamza, then at the blessed Prophet. I bear witness," he began. The followers were all watching him with bated breath. Umar had stopped shaking and now drew himself up to his full height. "I bear witness there is but one God and that you, Muhammad, are his true messenger." At the declaration of the kalima spoken by Umar, the Muslims could contain themselves no longer. They all cried as in one voice, "Allahu Akbar! God is the most great." The shouting was so loud and so full of joy, they say, that it resounded throughout the streets of Makkah. Umar, caught up in the enthusiasm of his newly found faith and the reaction of the believers, shouted with them the very words which he had so often scowled at a short time ago. "Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!" From that moment on, Umar brought the Muslims the strength, courage, and leadership abilities which he had once used against them. Immediately he became as enthusiastic and loud in his support of Islam as he had been before in opposing it. "Tell me, O Messenger of God," he asked, "are we not in the path of the truth whether we live or die?" "Yes, surely," replied the blessed Prophet. "It is time now for us to go out openly and claim our right to pray in the Kaaba." "Well then," said Umar, turning to the others with outstretched arms, "let us go and pray in front of whomever we will. Now that Umar is with you, there is no need to hide from anyone." The blessed Prophet nodded, smiled, and gave his consent. Out of Arqam's house they marched in 2 rows, one led by Umar and the other by Hamza, Makkah's 2 fearless leaders. Down the street they filed, to the surprise of citizens along the way. Into the haram they went, and before the eyes of their astounded opponents began their Islamic prayer. Now that Umar had become a Muslim, he was also ashamed, deep down, of the persecution he had inflicted on his fellow believers. He was eager to right the matter by putting himself in the same position. The first person to whom he thought of declaring his new belief was the greatest enemy of Islam, the blessed Prophet's uncle and respected leader of the Quraysh, Abu Jahl himself. So the very next day after his declaration, Umar went straight to Abu Jahl's house. With head held high and shoulders squared, he knocked loudly. "Who is there?" asked Abu Jahl. "Son of Khattab," replied Umar, and Abu Jahl opened the door. Umar looked down on the venerated leader of the Quraysh. "I have come to announce," he declared, "that I have given up the religion of my forefathers." Umar awaited the expected attack in either words or action, but none came. Abu Jahl was stunned. "The man is drunk," he thought to himself, "or he's had too much sun. I'd better humor him rather than turn that giant's wrath upon me." "Really?" he croaked. "Yes, really," roared Umar, expecting a fight. But Abu Jahl just stood a moment, then said in a low voice, "Don't do that, Umar." Umar became frustrated. "I shall never give up Islam, never." Abu Jahl, shocked, angry and afraid, hurriedly retreated inside his house and slammed the door in Umar's face. Umar could not believe it. Nothing had come of his announcement. Turning on his heel, he marched down the street and knocked on the door of 2 more tribal chiefs. One, deciding that Umar must be drunk, refused to argue with him, and the other quickly changed the subject of conversation. Umar shook his head in bewilderment. What was wrong with these people that they didn't want to challenge him? He tried declaring his belief to a third man who was walking in his direction. Realizing that Umar was serious, the man told him, "Look, Umar, if you really want everyone to know that you have embraced Islam, then you should go and tell Jamil, son of Muammar, the greatest gossip in town. Once he hears about it, the news will spread like wildfire." Umar thought this was an excellent idea, so at dusk, when everyone had assembled in the haram, Umar went up to Jamil and told him of his conversion to Islam. Jamil couldn't wait. Bursting with this astounding piece of news, he cried aloud to all present, "Lo, citizens of Makkah, the son of Khattab has become a heretic." But Umar would have none of that. "Idiot," he said, pushing him aside. "This man's a liar," he shouted. "Now hear the truth. Umar, son of Khattab, have declared for all the world to hear, there is no God but the one God, and Muhammad is his messenger."
وأشهد أن محمد رسول الله.
The assembly was appalled. What was happening here? The enemy of Muhammad had become a turncoat and was now on his side? So shocked were the braver ones by this announcement, they forgot about Umar's powerful build and rushed at him, beating him with their fists and threatening him with their swords. This was exactly what Umar wanted. One by one he fought them off, a blow here, a sword slash there. "This follower of Muhammad is no weakling," he cried. Taste the sword of Allah. Umar received quite a few blows in the skirmish. But in the end, the attackers all fell back to nurse their wounds, and Umar stood alone in the empty haram, having tasted the pain of chastisement as well as the fruits of victory.